3 months ago, Claire Reynolds stood frozen in her kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as the sound of glass shattering echoed through a house she no longer owned. Before I get back into the story, kindly do me the favor of clicking the subscribe button, like the video, and telling me in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support truly helps the channel grow. At the time, she didn't know that moment would become the clearest proof that walking away from her family had saved her life. Back then, she believed her parents were destroying her out of spite. Later, she would understand they were only revealing who they had always been. Claire was 33 now, calm on the surface, steady in her career, and finally at peace, but the road there had been paved with sacrifice, betrayal, and a single decision that changed everything. The story didn't begin with broken furniture or police sirens. It began 5 years earlier, with a number that meant everything to her, $120,000. That money wasn't luck or inheritance. It was 4 years of discipline, exhaustion, and saying no to comfort while everyone else said yes. At 28, Claire lived in a studio apartment barely large enough to stretch her arms. She counted every dollar, rode the bus in winter rain, and celebrated birthdays alone with cheap cupcakes and quiet hope. Every sacrifice had a purpose. She wasn't chasing luxury. She wanted something simpler: space, stability, and a home that belonged only to her. She believed if she worked hard enough, life would eventually meet her halfway. What she didn't know was that the people closest to her were already counting her money for themselves. Every Saturday, Claire drove to her parents' house for dinner. It was routine, predictable, and comforting in a way she didn't question. Linda Reynolds cooked the same meals she always had, and Robert Reynolds complained about his back while insisting he was fine. Claire's older sister, Vanessa Reynolds, arrived late more often than not, usually with her husband, Kyle Morrison, whose confidence always seemed to exceed his achievements. Kyle loved big ideas, business plans scribbled on napkins, promises of fast success, shortcuts to wealth. Vanessa believed in him fiercely, even after 2 failed ventures had nearly cost their parents their home. Claire rarely spoke during these dinners. She listened, observed, and kept her private life private. That October evening, though, something felt wrong the moment she stepped inside. The room buzzed with tension disguised as excitement. Vanessa and Kyle whispered near the hallway. Linda watched Claire too closely, her smile sharp at the edges. Robert avoided eye contact altogether. Claire sat down, unaware she was walking into an ambush. She had photos on her phone of a 3-bedroom craftsman she planned to buy, hardwood floors, sunlit kitchen, quiet street. She thought she was there to share good news. Instead, Linda cleared her throat and smiled too brightly. Vanessa has something important to share, she said. Vanessa didn't just speak. She presented charts, printed projections, market forecasts, her third business idea. She spoke with rehearsed confidence, promising growth and success, insisting she had finally learned from her mistakes. Kyle nodded beside her, adding polished comments about expansion and returns. Then, slowly, every face in the room turned toward Claire. Not curiosity. Expectation. The kind that assumes compliance before the question is even asked. Claire felt the shift immediately. Linda spoke first, casual but calculated. Vanessa mentioned you've saved quite a bit. The words landed heavier than they should have. Claire's stomach tightened. She hadn't told them numbers. She hadn't invited discussion. Vanessa leaned forward, voice soft, almost affectionate. Mom says you have around $120,000 saved. Silence swallowed the room. Claire finally understood. This wasn't about family pride or shared joy. It was about access. I'm not putting my house money into your business, Claire said. Vanessa's expression collapsed as if rehearsed, tears forming on command. Kyle stiffened. You double your money in 2 years, Vanessa insisted. Claire laughed once, sharp and humorless. You've failed twice already, she replied. Maybe it's time to stop chasing schemes and get a steady job. The reaction was immediate. Vanessa fled the room sobbing. Kyle followed, calling Claire selfish. Linda's face hardened. How could you be so cruel? She snapped. Vanessa has talent. You're just jealous. Robert delivered the final blow without raising his voice. Either you help your sister, or you're no longer part of this family. Claire looked at them, really looked, and felt something detach inside her. Then I guess I'm done, she said quietly. She stood, walked out, and drove home alone. The next morning, she changed her number. If love came with conditions, she refused to pay the price. 1 year later, Claire bought the house anyway. The same craftsman. The same sunlight. She moved in alone and felt peace settle over her life for the first time. No forced dinners. No financial guilt. No emotional pressure. 5 years passed in quiet success. Her career grew. Her confidence deepened. And then she met Daniel Foster, steady, thoughtful, distant but intentional. Long phone calls turned into visits, visits into plans. She began imagining a future that didn't revolve around survival. Then an email arrived from an address she barely remembered. Linda wrote that it was urgent. Life and death. Against her better judgment, Claire agreed to visit. When she pulled into her parents' driveway, she saw 2 luxury cars, Vanessa's and Kyle's. Inside, the truth spilled quickly. The business had collapsed. The house was gone. Vanessa owed $150,000. The tone shifted from fear to demand within minutes. Linda didn't hesitate. You should sell your house, she said. Claire stared at her. You can start over, Linda continued. Vanessa can't. Claire understood then. Nothing had changed. She was still a solution, not a daughter. She stood up. I won't destroy my life to fix hers, she said. They accused her of cruelty. She left without looking back. A week later, Linda and Robert showed up uninvited at Claire's house. They walked through her rooms like inspectors, discussing value, space, profit. Claire ordered them to leave. They refused. She threatened to call the police. They left angry and humiliated. That night, Claire made a decision. She sold the house quietly and moved in with Daniel. A month later, a police officer called. Linda and Robert had broken into Claire's former home, destroying property they believed still belonged to her. They were arrested. The irony was brutal. To pay restitution, they sold their own house, the one they claimed they could never give up, and handed the remaining money to Vanessa. The truth surfaced soon after. Vanessa had exaggerated everything. No threats. No danger. Just a lawsuit. Claire didn't feel victory. She felt relief. Months later, Daniel proposed. Claire said yes without hesitation. The life she built was quiet, stable, and hers. Walking away hadn't broken her. It had saved her. Living with Daniel felt nothing like an escape. It felt like a rival. His home was calm, orderly, and warm in ways Claire hadn't realized she'd been missing. There were no raised voices, no guilt-laced conversations, no unspoken expectations hovering in the air. Daniel never asked her to explain herself more than she wanted to. He listened when she spoke, and when she didn't, he didn't push. Claire continued working remotely, her days settling into a rhythm that felt steady and sane. In the evenings, they cooked together, talked about work, shared small observations about life. Sometimes they discussed the future, carefully, realistically. Claire hadn't told him everything about her family yet, but she didn't need to. He already understood enough to know why distance mattered. The peace was almost unsettling at first. For years, chaos had been normal. Now, nothing exploded. Nothing demanded. Nothing lurked around corners. She slept through the night. She stopped flinching at notifications. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe the worst was behind her. She didn't know yet that her parents were still spiraling, still clinging to the belief that if they couldn't control her choices, they could punish her for them. While Claire built something real, they were feeding resentment and convincing themselves they had been wronged. That belief hardened into anger. And anger, left alone long enough, looks for an outlet. The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Claire had just finished a meeting when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. Officer Daniel Harris explained there had been an incident involving her parents. The address he mentioned made Claire's breath catch. Her former home. The one she had sold weeks earlier. The details sounded unreal. Linda and Robert had broken in, convinced the house still belonged to Claire. They smashed furniture, broke windows, spray-painted insults on the walls. When the new owner arrived unexpectedly, Robert had been swinging a baseball bat. Claire sat down slowly as the weight of it settled in. If the homeowner had reacted differently, if he had been armed, her parents could have been killed. The officer explained they were in custody. Charges were being filed. Claire answered questions honestly, recounting years of pressure, the uninvited visit, the refusal to leave. When the call ended, she stared at the wall in silence. Daniel came home to find her sitting there, pale and shaken. When she told him everything, his reaction was simple and devastatingly clear. They crossed a line, he said. And it finally caught up to them.
Claire nodded.
For the first time, she didn't feel guilt.
She felt clarity.
News traveled quickly through mutual friends. Megan Lawson called a few days later, her voice low and stunned.
The legal outcome was already forming.
Linda and Robert accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time. The cost was heavy, tens of thousands in restitution, court fees, and legal expenses. They didn't have the money.
Their only option was to sell their house.
The same house they once claimed could never be touched. Megan hesitated before continuing. After everything, she said, they gave what was left to Vanessa.
Claire closed her eyes. The pattern was complete.
They had destroyed themselves trying to force Claire into sacrifice, only to end up making the very sacrifice they demanded from her.
And then the final truth emerged.
Vanessa's so-called dangerous creditors were nothing more than a legitimate investment firm preparing legal action.
No threats. No violence. Just consequences.
Claire felt no satisfaction in that revelation, only confirmation. The crisis had been exaggerated to manipulate fear. That fear had driven her parents to commit a crime. By the time the truth surfaced, the damage was done. Linda and Robert were renting a cramped apartment with Vanessa and Kyle. Tension filled every corner. Arguments were constant. The family dynamic they'd built on favoritism and pressure had collapsed under its own weight.
Attempts to reach Claire followed.
Messages passed through friends. Apologies surfaced cautiously, then more urgently. Linda wanted forgiveness.
Robert wanted understanding. Vanessa wanted sympathy. Claire declined every request. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply said no.
When Megan asked if she ever wondered whether cutting them off was too harsh, Claire answered without hesitation. They didn't lose me because of one mistake, she said. They lost me because they never stopped. Daniel supported her quietly, consistently. Together, they toured houses on weekends. Not dream castles, real homes with solid bones and room to grow. Claire noticed how different the experience felt this time. There was no fear driving her decisions. No pressure. No urgency born from crisis. Just choice. One evening, after a long day of viewings, Daniel paused in the living room and smiled in a way that made her heart skip.
He reached into his pocket and knelt.
The question came softly, without performance. Claire answered through tears, laughing and crying at once. Yes.
It felt right. It felt earned.
They put in an offer the following weekend.
It was accepted.
The house wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, chosen freely, built on trust instead of obligation. As they planned their future, Claire thought occasionally about her family.
The thoughts no longer hurt.
They felt distant, like memories from another life.
She didn't wish them harm. She didn't wish them back.
She wished herself peace, and she had it.
Her career thrived. Her home was safe. Her partner stood beside her without conditions. Walking away had not been an act of cruelty.
It had been an act of survival. Claire understood now that love built on pressure isn't love at all. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to be used. The life she created didn't come from sacrifice alone. It came from knowing when to stop sacrificing. And that knowledge changed everything. Even after the engagement, life didn't slow down. It sharpened. Claire threw herself into work with a clarity she had never known. Without constant emotional interference, her focus deepened, and results followed. Within months, her manager pulled her aside during a video call and offered her a promotion she hadn't expected so soon. More responsibility.
Better pay.
Real authority. Claire accepted without hesitation. For the first time, success felt clean. It wasn't fueled by desperation or escape.
It was simply earned.
Daniel celebrated quietly, cooking dinner and opening a bottle of wine he'd been saving. They talked late into the night about timelines, finances, and how they wanted to build their life. Everything felt deliberate. Nothing rushed. Claire noticed how different decision-making felt when no one was demanding pieces of her future.
She wasn't reacting anymore. She was choosing.
And with that came a new confidence, one that didn't need approval or validation.
She had proof now.
Walking away hadn't ruined her. It had unlocked everything she'd been holding back. Back in her hometown, things were unraveling. Megan filled in the details slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid the truth might sting. Living together had exposed every crack in the family. Linda and Robert argued constantly, about money, about blame, about whose idea it had been to confront Claire in the first place. Vanessa lashed out whenever the subject of responsibility came up. Kyle withdrew, spending long hours away, chasing yet another opportunity no one believed in anymore. The apartment felt too small for that much resentment. Friends who once admired the family from the outside now kept their distance.
The story had spread.
Not just the arrest, but the reason behind it.
The favoritism.
The pressure. The desperation. Linda tried to defend herself, insisting she had only wanted to protect her daughter. But even she couldn't explain why that protection had always come at Claire's expense. Slowly, painfully, the truth settled in.
They hadn't lost Claire because she was cold.
They lost her because they had never listened when she said no. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail.
Claire recognized the handwriting instantly. Linda's. She held the envelope for a long time before opening it.
The letter was long, emotional, and full of regret, but it was also careful. Apologies wrapped in explanations. Accountability diluted with justification. Linda wrote about fear, about making mistakes, about wanting to fix things before it was too late.
Claire read every word.
When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope.
She didn't respond. Not out of anger.
Out of certainty.
Some conversations come too late to matter. She told Daniel about it that evening. He asked one simple question.
Do you feel like replying? Claire thought for a moment, then shook her head.
No, she said. And that was the end of it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was calm.
As the wedding plans took shape, Claire found herself surrounded by people who showed up without being asked. Friends helped with details. Daniel's family welcomed her without interrogation or expectation.
No one asked what she could give. They asked how she was doing.
It was a quiet revelation. Love didn't have to hurt to be real. On a spring afternoon, Claire stood in the backyard of their new home, imagining chairs set up under string lights, laughter carrying into the evening air. She realized something then. This life would never have existed if she had stayed.
If she had folded.
If she had paid the price demanded of her. Every good thing she now had came from the same source, the moment she chose herself, even when it cost her everything she thought she needed.
Claire no longer wondered whether she had made the right choice. The question had lost its power.
Her days were full.
Her nights were peaceful.
Her future felt open instead of heavy. Somewhere, her family was still living with the consequences of choices they refused to own.
Claire wasn't part of that story anymore.
She had written a new one, quiet, steady, and real.
And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She was living. Time moved forward without ceremony.
Claire stopped receiving second-hand updates about her parents because she stopped asking. The distance wasn't dramatic anymore, it was simply permanent. Life filled the space where tension used to live. Mornings began with quiet routines and ended with shared meals, plans, and laughter that didn't come with expectations attached. Claire noticed how her body felt lighter, how her thoughts no longer circled around preparing for conflict that never arrived.
She wasn't bracing herself anymore. She was present.
Daniel became her partner in every sense, steady during stress, playful during rest, and honest when things mattered. Together, they learned what it meant to trust without fear. Claire realized that peace wasn't something she had to earn daily. It was something that stayed when nothing was trying to take it away. Wedding planning brought moments of reflection she hadn't expected. Filling out forms, choosing invitations, imagining the guest list, it all highlighted one quiet truth.
Her side would be smaller. And she was okay with that.
The people who would stand beside her on that day were there because they wanted to be, not because they felt entitled to her. When friends asked about her family, Claire answered calmly, without bitterness or explanation. "We're not close," she said. And that was enough. She had learned that not every story needed defending. Some decisions stood strong without justification. The absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like alignment. On a warm evening months later, Claire and Daniel sat on their porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. She thought briefly about the younger version of herself, the woman counting coins in a tiny apartment, believing endurance was the same thing as love. She wished she could tell her one thing, that choosing herself would not make her lonely, that walking away would not break her, that saying no would eventually lead her somewhere safe. Claire smiled at the thought, then let it go. The past no longer needed revisiting. It had already done its job. Claire's parents never showed up again. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no final confrontations, no sudden understanding. Just distance. And that distance did what apologies never could. It stopped the harm. Vanessa continued chasing quick solutions. Linda and Robert continued living with the results of the choices they defended for years.
Claire didn't follow their story anymore. It wasn't hers to carry.
She had learned that love offered with conditions isn't generosity, it's leverage.
And she had refused to be owned.
On the morning of her wedding, Claire stood in front of the mirror, calm and steady.
She wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she had protected. Her future. Her peace.
Her ability to choose a life that didn't demand she disappear to keep others comfortable. When she stepped outside and saw Daniel waiting, she knew, with absolute certainty, that walking away had been the beginning, not the end.
Some people inherit family.
Others build it. Claire had built hers carefully, honestly, and without fear. And that made all the difference.
Thank you so much for watching until the end.
Sometimes walking away is the only way forward, and choosing peace, stability, and self-respect can change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. I truly appreciate your support.